All right, today we're diving into something really interesting, a real puzzle when it comes to the immigrant experience. And it's all about how people perceive prejudice. So let's kick things off with a question that honestly seems to defy all logic. Why is it that the children of immigrants, the ones born and raised in a new country, often report feeling more discriminated against than their own parents? How does that even make sense? Well, to get to the bottom of this, we're going to unpack the research from a really big study that looked into this exact question. We'll dig into the data on who feels this way, explore some of the theories about why it's happening, and importantly, what it all means for society. Okay, so first up, this generational puzzle. It's a phenomenon that really flips what you'd expect about integration on its head. I mean, think about it. On paper, the second generation should have it easier, right? They speak the language perfectly, they went to local schools, they get the culture. You'd assume they wouldn't face the same hurdles as their parents. But when you look at how they feel about discrimination, the data tells a completely different story. And this right here gets to the absolute heart of the matter. The research isn't just about who objectively gets treated more unfairly. It's about who feels it, who perceives it. And trust me, that one little distinction changes the entire conversation. So before we go any further, to really get a grip on these perceptions, we need to be on the same page about what we're talking about. How do researchers even define and measure this stuff? The definition they use is pretty straightforward. Discrimination is basically unequal or unfair treatment because of who you are, your race, religion, where your family's from, and this can pop up anywhere, trying to get a job, finding a place to live, or just out and about. Okay, so researchers have two main ways of looking at this. One is what they call objective measurement. Think of those experiments where they send out the exact same resume but with different names to see who gets a callback. The other way is subjective. They just ask people about their personal experiences. And that's what we're focusing on today, that perceived discrimination. Now, it's easy to think, oh, perception, that's just a feeling. But it has huge real-world consequences. It shapes a person's entire identity and their trust in society. And what's really important here is that the research shows that the groups who feel the most discriminated against are almost always the same groups that the objective experiments show are the most discriminated against. So the feeling often lines up with a very real reality. All right, so who are we talking about? Who feels this the most? Let's get right into the data. Okay, this table tells a really powerful story. Take a look at immigrants from the Middle East and North Africa, that's MENA. For non-Muslims, the number stays pretty flat, right around 18% for both generations. But for Muslims from the exact same region, it jumps from 29% to 37%. And then look at the most dramatic change, Muslims from Black Africa. It goes from 30% in the first generation to a massive 77% in the second. That's a huge leap. So this chart just pulls out that data for the second generation from the MENA region. And wow, the contrast is just so stark. You've got two groups, same part of the world, but the second generation Muslims are more than twice as likely to feel discriminated against compared to their non-Muslim neighbors. It's right there in the numbers. So the first major takeaway here is pretty undeniable. Religion, specifically being Muslim, is a huge factor in these perceptions. And that feeling of being targeted, it actually seems to get stronger for the next generation, not weaker. Now, the other group that the data shows consistently reports high levels of discrimination are Black immigrants. And this is true whether they're from Africa or the Caribbean, which really points to race being another major powerful factor at play here. And sometimes discrimination is tied to something you can see. This number just stops you in your tracks, 35%. That's the share of Muslim women who say they've faced discrimination while looking for a job, specifically because of their clothing. It's such a clear, concrete example of how a visible part of someone's identity can become a target. So all of this brings us right back to where we started. Why? Why does the second generation feel this so much more sharply? Well, the research gives us a few really compelling reasons. For one, they might just be better at recognizing it. They grew up in the culture, so they can pick up on those subtle, passive-aggressive comments that their parents might not even notice. Second, and this one is so important, they have higher expectations. They were born here. They see themselves as equals, and they expect, rightfully, to be treated that way. And finally, kind of ironically, because they're more integrated into society, they just have more opportunities to run into prejudice. The social atmosphere around this stuff is also really critical. The research points out something interesting. In most Western countries today, it is deeply socially unacceptable to openly express anti-Black prejudice. But, unfortunately,
Expressing anti-Muslim prejudice can be seen as more socially acceptable even if people frown on it. And that difference really changes how these things play out in public.
When it comes to anti-Muslim discrimination specifically, the study kind of breaks it down into three pieces. First, there's what they call taste-based dislike, which is basically just a person holding a negative view of the group. Second, there's the idea that making accommodations for religion at work, like prayer rooms, is a burden. And third, as we've already touched on, visible things like a hijab can make people an easier and more obvious target.
Okay, so we've seen the data and the reasons, but so what? Why does any of this matter? Well, it matters because these feelings don't just exist in a bubble. They have real, concrete effects on people's lives and on all of society.
Think about it. If you constantly feel like you're being treated unfairly, you're going to start pulling back. Your connection to the country feels weaker. You stop trusting institutions like the police or the courts. It causes real social and economic damage. Over time, it can even lead to what some call parallel societies, where communities feel like they have to close ranks and only rely on each other. And this chart really drives that point home. Look at this. For young people who said they always felt discriminated against, a whopping 44% said they have no sense of belonging. But for those who said they never felt that way, that number drops all the way down to 25%. The connection is right there, clear as day.
Which leaves us with one last and pretty heavy question to think about. We often measure how successful a country is with immigration by looking at the next generation. Do they feel like they belong? Do they feel at home? So if that next generation is actually feeling more like an outsider than their parents did, what on earth does that mean for the future of what it means to belong?